I came to my grandfather's house on a dull gray Tuesday in October without calling ahead, and that single decision changed everything. My name is Samantha Overton. I'm 34 years old. Walter opened the door before I even finished knocking, and the second I saw his face, I knew something was wrong. He looked pale, drained, like all the color had been pulled straight out of him. He grabbed my sleeve, yanked me over the threshold, and said the words I still hear in my sleep. Get inside fast. Hide right now. I opened my mouth to ask what on earth he meant, and then I heard it, tires grinding over the gravel behind me. My mother's car rolled into the driveway. Walter pushed me toward the kitchen, straight toward the narrow space behind the pantry cabinet. He did not look confused. He looked like a man who had been waiting for me to show up at exactly the right second. In the next 40 minutes, I heard things that changed the way I saw my mother forever, and what I did after that tore my family clean apart. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people find their voice, and the truth always ends up at the table sooner or later. If stories about family, courage, and standing your ground speak to you, drop a comment and make sure you subscribe. The space behind the pantry smelled like old wood and stale coffee. I pressed my back against the wall and made myself as small as I could. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure everyone in the room could hear it. The front door opened without a knock. My mother's voice came first, bright and smooth in a way I had not heard in years. Dad, it's just us. Don't get up. Then came footsteps crossing the living room. 2 more people followed her. I knew Gerald's heavy, slow walk right away. He was the man she had married just a little over a year earlier. The third set of steps was lighter, quicker, the click of heels on the hardwood my grandfather had laid himself. I had never heard that woman before, but I heard the confidence in her footsteps long before I knew her name. The couch gave a soft sigh as someone sat down. Then my grandfather's voice, thin and wandering on purpose, asked if anyone wanted tea. Nobody answered him. Instead, the unfamiliar woman spoke in a flat, businesslike tone and set something heavy down on the coffee table. Papers. A thick stack of them. The kind of papers that make that soft, expensive slap when they land. We'll keep this simple, Walter, she said. Just a few signatures today. My mother made that soothing little sound she always used when I was little and frightened. The sound that used to mean safety. Hearing it now made my skin crawl. I stayed frozen behind the cabinet, staring through the crack into the kitchen, and I realized something that made my stomach turn. Whatever was about to happen in that living room was not a visit. It was an operation, and my grandfather had known it was coming. That was why he'd hidden me. I just didn't yet understand how deep this went. Let me step back, because you need to know who was sitting in that room. My mother, Paula, is 57, and all my life she ran our family like a thermostat. When she was warm, everybody relaxed. When she turned cold, all of us scrambled to bring the temperature back up. I learned early that peace always came with a price, and that price was usually me giving in. I'm a geriatric nurse. I spend my days with people my grandfather's age, reading charts, noticing the tiny changes families miss, and spotting what is happening long before anyone else wants to admit it. I know exactly what it looks like when a healthy person is treated like they are already gone. Gerald, my mother's new husband, was 60. He wore expensive shoes and talked about business deals that somehow never quite closed. I had met him maybe 6 times. The woman with the heels was a stranger to me. What made my stomach twist was not only the papers, it was the fact that 3 weeks earlier, my grandfather had stopped calling me every Sunday, the way he had for years. And a bank letter meant for him had shown up forwarded to my mother's address. I noticed it. I actually called the bank and asked why, because that is the kind of thing you do when something feels off. They told me they could not discuss another person's account with me. I was not on the account. I had no standing. I remember hanging up and telling myself I was being paranoid, that families forward mail all the time, that I was making something out of nothing. I wanted so badly to be wrong. Now, Crouched behind that pantry, listening to a stranger tell my grandfather to sign papers, I understood that I had not been paranoid at all. I had just been early, and I had let myself get talked out of it. That is the part I still cannot forgive myself for. The stranger guided him through the papers in a calm, practiced voice. She said the documents would let my mother handle things so Walter would not have to worry. Financial power of attorney, she called it. Once he signed, my mother could manage his accounts, his bills, everything. Then Gerald spoke. His voice was softer, which somehow made it worse. He said the house was really too much for a man living alone. He said there was a lovely place over the county line, assisted living, and once the house sold, that money would cover the best care. My grandfather made a tiny, lost sound and asked what would happen to his garden. Nobody answered him. My mother leaned in then, and her voice dropped into that lower register she used when she wanted hard truth to sound like kindness. Dad, we've gone over this. You forget things now. This is for your own good. And then she said the words I will hear for the rest of my life. He won't remember by Christmas anyway. She said it like she was mentioning the weather. Not cruel exactly. Worse than cruel. Certain. I bit down on my knuckle to keep from making a sound. My eyes burned. Through the crack, I could see the arm of my grandfather's chair and his hand resting there. And then I saw that hand move. Not the shaky movement of a frightened old man. Steady. He had a pencil stub, and against the side of the chair where they could not see, he was writing something small and careful on a scrap of paper. My grandfather, the man they had just declared too far gone to run his own life, was quietly taking notes. My heart was breaking, and something else was waking up at the same time. I did not know yet that he was not the one who needed saving. He was the one running the trap. For the next few minutes, my grandfather gave the best performance I have ever seen in my life. He forgot Gerald's name twice and called him the fellow from the bank. He asked the same question about the garden 3 times in a row until my mother's patience started to crack. Dad, please, she snapped, and I heard the real Paula slip right through the warm mask, tight, irritated, impatient. The stranger tried to guide the pen into his hand. He fumbled it, knocked it to the floor, and apologized in a small, confused voice. And Gerald sighed. Not a big dramatic sigh. Just the kind of sigh a man makes when he thinks money is taking too long to arrive. They decided Walter was too tired to sign today. My mother said they would come back over the weekend when he was having a better day. I could hear the disappointment in the room thick as smoke. Then, while they gathered their coats and the stranger tucked the papers back into her bag, my grandfather did the one thing that told me everything. He turned his head slowly toward the kitchen, toward the exact spot where I was hiding, and for one single second, his eyes were not cloudy at all. They were sharp, clear, completely present. They found me in the dark behind that cabinet like he had known I was there the whole time. He gave the tiniest shake of his head. Stay quiet. Wait. Then the fog rolled back over his face, and he asked no one in particular if it was time for supper. My hands were trembling. My grandfather was not confused. My grandfather was pretending to be confused, and he was doing it so well that his own daughter believed it. The only question in my chest was simple and horrible. How long has he been acting? They left the papers on the coffee table for him to look over. My mother kissed the top of his head and told him to rest. The front door clicked shut. The car started. Gravel crunched again as they backed out of the driveway. I counted to 60 in the dark the way you count during a storm, waiting to be certain it has passed. Then my grandfather said, in his own real voice, low and steady, "You can come out now, Sam." I climbed out on legs that did not want to work. He was standing by the window, staring at the empty driveway. When he turned to me, he looked 10 years younger and completely worn out at the same time. I asked him what was going on. He pulled me into a hug that smelled like cedar and pencil shavings, and then he explained it the way he explained everything else, plain, direct, no wasted words. Once an accountant, always an accountant. For months, he had suspected Paula and Gerald were after the house. He had started acting forgetful so they would lower their guard and show him the full plan instead of taking it piece by piece. "If I told you your mother was doing this," he said, "you would have found a way to doubt me. You needed to hear it yourself." That was why he had hidden me. Not because he was panicking, because he had a strategy. Get inside quickly. Hide right now. So his granddaughter, the nurse, the one person who might actually stop this, could hear everything from the wall. Then he reached into his cardigan pocket and pressed the scrap of paper into my hand. The same paper he had been writing on during that awful meeting. On it, in his neat accountant's handwriting, was a name and a number. "Start here," he said. "And Sam, your mother has a key to this house. She can come back any time." I sat at his kitchen table and made him explain every line of that page. The name was Ruth Delgado, an elder law attorney who had handled his affairs decades ago, back when my grandmother was still alive. The number below it was not a phone number. It was a dollar amount. 18,000. "That's what's gone," he said. "In 3 months." He had noticed the account balance dropping. Small withdrawals he never made. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. Spread out just enough to avoid setting off alarms. When he called the bank, a new authorized contact had already been added to help him, and that help was draining him dry. He had stopped calling me on Sundays because Paula had begun dropping by every Sunday, and he did not want her to realize how close the two of us still were. Everything I had half noticed and then talked myself out of snapped into place at once. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a plan with a timetable. The house he had built. The retirement he had saved for over 4 decades. The small memorial fund he kept in my grandmother's name. All of it was on the table. And so was his dignity, which mattered most of all to him. He told me he was not afraid of dying. He was afraid of being erased while he was still breathing, pushed into a facility, and voted out of his own life by the people who were supposed to love him. I looked at the papers still lying on the coffee table. At the pen the stranger had left beside them like a dare. I thought about my mother's voice. He won't remember by Christmas anyway, and I made a decision I could not undo. "They're not getting this house," I said. He almost smiled. "Then we'd better move quickly," he said. "She has a key." I drove the 15 minutes back to my own place with both hands locked on the steering wheel and my mind spinning in circles. For my whole life, I had managed my mother by folding. Not because I was weak, but because folding was cheaper than fighting. Now the fight was here whether I wanted it or not. And that old reflex kept whispering that if I just stayed quiet, if I just kept the peace, none of this would get worse. I knew better. At work, I had seen the other side of this. I had seen charts. I had sat in family meetings. I knew that the urge to keep things calm is exactly what situations like this feed on. That night, I could not sleep, so I did what nurses do. I researched. And what I found made my stomach drop. Adult children are the most common people responsible for elder financial abuse. Not strangers on the phone, not some scammer overseas, but their own kids. Nearly 40% of the cases reported to federal regulators involve adult children draining a parent. And once a power of attorney is signed, it is brutally hard to undo. If my mother got Walter to sign, she would not even be breaking the law anymore. She would be operating legally, with my grandfather's own name giving her the power to do it. I sat at my kitchen table at 2 o'clock in the morning with a legal pad and started writing down everything I knew. Dates, amounts, the forwarded letter, the stranger with the papers. Over-responsibility has always been my flaw. My instinct to carry what was never mine to carry. For once, that instinct had a target that actually deserved it. By the time the sky started turning gray, I had a plan that began with one phone call. I sat in my car outside my grandfather's house long after they had gone, still half wanting to believe I had misheard something. If you have ever caught someone you love in a lie you cannot unhear, then you know that kind of silence. Stay with me, because what my grandfather did next changed everything. Leave a comment and subscribe. Ruth Delgado remembered my grandfather the second I said his name. Walter R. Byrne, she said, warm and quick. Sharpest man in Bellhaven. How is he? I told her the truth, and the warmth in her voice turned into something harder and far more useful. She had spent 30 years in elder law, and she had seen this machine at work more times than she could count. She laid the situation out for me in plain English. No softening, no padding. Honestly, I appreciated that. As long as Walter had not signed the power of attorney yet, we still had a door open. But it was closing. To keep that door open, we needed 3 things. First, proof that my grandfather was mentally competent, a real capacity evaluation from a doctor, so nobody could claim he did not understand what he was doing. Second, documentation of the money that had already moved, the withdrawals, the added contact, all of it. Third, we could report the entire thing to Adult Protective Services and let the state investigate. Then her voice lowered. But Samantha, she said, if they've scheduled a signing this weekend, we are talking days, not weeks. Once he signs, everything gets 10 times harder. Then we are fighting to undo a legal document instead of stopping one. I asked her what I could do that would matter most right now. She thought for a second and then said, "You're a nurse. You know how a capacity evaluation works. Get him one from someone credible, on the record. That is the wall they cannot climb, because their whole plan rests on one lie, that he is not competent. Prove he is, and their whole thing falls apart." I hung up with a to-do list in one hand and a countdown in the other. Days, not weeks. And my mother had a key to his front door. That was when my job stopped being a job and started being a weapon. Not the kind my mother used. She worked with warmth turned on and off like a light switch, with guilt and pressure and papers slid across a table to a man she had already told everybody was too foggy to understand them. My weapons were different, and that difference is the whole point. She worked in manipulation. I worked in documentation. She wanted my grandfather declared incompetent behind closed doors. I was going to get him examined in the open by a doctor whose signature actually meant something. I called Dr. Hale, a geriatrician I had worked beside for 6 years, a man so careful he double-checked his own double checks. I told him what I was seeing. He did not hesitate. He booked Walter for a full cognitive evaluation that Thursday, 2 days away. Not a favor, not a shortcut. A real exam, with real scoring, something that would hold up anywhere. I explained it to my grandfather over the phone that night. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Good. Let them say I'm gone. I'll take the test and prove I'm here." That was the shape of it. My mother's entire scheme rested on one claim, that he could not understand what he was signing. If a credible doctor wrote down that he understood everything clearly, then her lie had nowhere to stand. I was not going to yell at her. I was not going to beg her. I was going to build a wall of facts so solid that no sweet voice could talk its way through it. I slept a little better that night, though not by much, because I kept thinking about that key, and about the signing scheduled for the weekend, and about how people like my mother always move faster the second they feel watched. She called me the next morning, and I knew from the first second what kind of call it was. She was using the warm voice. That was the warning. She only got that sweet when she wanted something. "Sweetheart," she said, "I've been meaning to talk to you about your grandfather." She told me he was slipping. She said it broke her heart. She said Gerald and she were only trying to protect him from himself. She said she would hate for him to sign some bad contract or get scammed. The irony almost made me laugh. And underneath all the honey, I could hear the real question she was asking. She wanted to know what I knew. The old me would have rushed to reassure her, to smooth the moment, to make her feel like I was on her side so the call could end without conflict. I felt that old reflex rise in my throat exactly like it always did, and I swallowed it. "That's really sad, Mom," I said, and nothing else. Flat, safe, no thread for her to pull. There was a tiny pause on her end, the sound of somebody recalculating. Then, casual as anything, she mentioned Grandpa's 80th birthday at the end of the month. "The whole family is coming," she said. "Neighbors, the pastor, everyone. It'll be lovely." She said it like it was nothing, but I heard the weight sitting under it. She was building an audience. Whatever she planned to do, she wanted it done in front of people so it would look like consensus instead of theft. I told her the party sounded nice and got off the phone before my voice could betray me. Then I sat very still. She had moved the date. Not the weekend anymore. The birthday. She wanted witnesses, and that told me she was more dangerous than I had first believed, because she was not just thinking about what she wanted to do, she was thinking about how it would look. On Wednesday, I took my grandfather to the bank. He wanted to change his mailing address back to his own house and get a printout of every transaction from the last 6 months. Simple, reasonable things a man should be allowed to do with his own money. We sat across from a young banker named Trevor, who kept looking at his screen with a face that got more uncomfortable by the minute. My grandfather politely asked why his statements had been going to his daughter's address. Trevor said a change had been requested on his behalf. Walter then asked who had authorized Gerald to be added as a signer on one of his accounts. Trevor's ears went red. The change had been written into a limited authorization Renata had coaxed out of him weeks earlier under the excuse of helping with the bills. It had been submitted in person with a notarized signature card that had cleared.